Alright everyone, welcome back to my Kerbal Space Program tutorial series featuring the Interstellar Extended Mod. First, I'd like to say that I'm sorry that it took so long to bring out this episode. I've been kind of a lazy bastard, and on the other side I've been waiting for the latest Interstellar update to come out, which features really nice new models for the reactors. And as you can guess, today's episode will be about reactors and generators. And here I've loaded up a career game to just show you the reactors in the tech tree. The first reactors you start off are very simple nuclear reactors, like this molten salt reactor. And with each tech level, you will get either new toys, such as this pebble bed reactor, or upgrades to existing reactors. So you start off with simple nuclear reactors, progress through advanced nuclear reactors, even higher energy upgrades for the nuclear reactors, and then you slowly start researching fusion power in the form of these three babies, which are really nice models, by the way. And then you progress to even more advanced fusion reactors and ultimately exotic reactors or antimatter power harnessing reactors. Alright, so that's the reactor part. And on the other part, we have the generators. Oops, that's not where you get it. Here's where you get it. You have the thermal electric generator, which uses the thermal power generated from a reactor to generate electric power. And then you also have the charged particle electric generator, which takes charged particles generated by some reactors and turns that into electric power at a higher efficiency. And then in the very end, you get a combination of the two, the magneto-hydrodynamic electric generator, which basically combines the thermal and the direct energy generator. And yeah, it will take both all of the energy of a reactor and turn that into power. Alright, so like the last times, I threw together a test bed with all the reactors that I want to talk about. But this time I'm not gonna go into as much detail about how the reactors work, because for one, that would take forever. For two, I'm more of the aerospace engineer and not the particle physicist, so all my knowledge here is I just read about that online on Wikipedia or anything. And three, because that would really take forever. So the first reactor is the molten salt reactor. It's a very basic liquid core reactor where the nuclear fuel is uranium fluoride, which is a salt. And alternatively, you can use thorium fluoride, which is way cheaper, but also, doesn't last as long. And in terms of lasting, this is one of the big advantages of this reactor. It can last forever. It is 100% active right now. It produces moderate amount of power with a moderate core temperature, and at 100% power it lasts for 30 years. And additionally, you have another mode which is called uranium burnup mode. This halves the power output but greatly increases the lifetime of the reactor. Burnup means you use almost every little inch of or every little gram of uranium fluoride that is available to produce power. And as you can see, this will basically last forever. One thing to consider, though, is this thing will produce actinides at a certain rate per day, and these actinides will slowly poison the reactor and reduce the power output over time, so it's a good idea to bring some sort of processing units with you to reprocess the fuel and use the reactor again. Alright, second reactor you will get access to is the pebble bed reactor. This one is very powerful. This is a quite powerful reactor which can produce a lot of thermal power and enable rockets with a thrust-to-weight ratio of bigger than 1. So you can have fairly efficient 800 ISP launch vehicles at a good thrust. And if your mission doesn't take too long, the pebble bed effect, which means that the higher your core temperature gets, the lower your thermal power output gets, won't affect you as much. I'll show an example of a pebble bed launcher that I built later. The third one, or the last fission reactor you will get access to, is the dusty plasma fission fragment reactor. It uses a similar fuel to the pebble bed reactor. You can see this uranium nitride, which is, by the way, also quite expensive. So those are not necessarily good for long-term applications. But in certain cases, if you can produce that or if you can reprocess, it can be feasible. But coming back to the dusty plasma reactor, it's the first fission reactor that is able to create charged particles, which is basically a beam of ions that can be used for different things than the thermal power. The thermal power is basically just the heat, and it's either being converted into electricity or channeled through a nozzle. The charged particles you can either channel through a direct conversion generator, which will produce electricity at a much higher efficiency, meaning that you don't need as many radiators and make your whole craft lighter. Or you can channel that beam through a magnetic nozzle and generate very high ISP propulsion. You can see here this is ridiculously high. 100,000 ISP and growing if you reduce the throttle, so you could theoretically power with very little fuel power a dusty plasma rocket forever. At this point you have the 3 nuclear reactors, and after that you will get access to the fusion reactors. Fusion reactors generally have the advantage of being able to use very different fuels, or a lot of different fuels that have different properties and different advantages and disadvantages. But it's worth noting that the fusion reactors all need another power source to maintain the fusion. This can either be capacitors and a generator attached, so you need power to turn up and you need power to maintain the fusion. So for example, here I can see I need 38 megawatts to maintain the fusion in this magnetized target fusion reactor, and it can create up to 3 gigawatts of power, which is slightly more than the pebble bed reactor. And it's also a little bit lighter. But this one is similar to the pebble bed reactor, can be quite nice for SSTOs or SSTO planes. This is why I put the thermal turbojet to it. You can get good thrusts and very nice looking vehicles with that. But this one cannot produce charged particles, so it's not suitable for magnetic propulsion or high efficiency electric generation. These two, the spherical tokamak or the magnetic confinement fusion reactor or accelerator, those two are magnetic confinement fusion reactors. They operate by the same principle of magnetically confining a plasma at a very high temperature and thus leading to the fusion reaction. And yeah, the accelerator is slightly more efficient but has a higher weight, and the tokamak can scale down way more. Like in the beginning you start off with a, I think, 3.75 meter minimum diameter, and as you research more tech nodes you can scale this down further, increasing the variety of scenarios where you can use it. But these two reactors, they can basically produce a lot of thermal power. In the deuterium-tritium mode, for example, you have a nice thermal power here, and you can use that to generate electricity and then power electric engines. Or you can use them, as I set up this one here, you can use it in, for example, deuterium-lithium fusion, which creates way more charge power, almost 100%, and thus make very high efficiency electric power. And you can, for example, use this electric power to create a beamed power network, like I did with this infrared laser. So the use scenarios for those fusion reactors are very wide, like you have a lot of opportunities to use them. And the different fuels is always kind of a balance between what you want to achieve. The longer you play or the more tech nodes you unlock, the more options you will unlock for fusion modes. For example, now in the sandbox mode, I have just a huge variety of different fusion modes that this can operate in, and you can see that the power output and fusion maintenance all changes depending on which mode you're using. The consideration here is how long do you want to use this reactor and how expensive is the fuel. For example, just simple lithium is very cheap and can be harvested on a lot of planets. But for example, helium-3 is very expensive. But if you're doing missions to one of the gas giants, if you're using planet packs, you can harness helium-3 out of the atmosphere of these gas giants. And thus this may be suitable because the power output is also quite good. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is fusion modes can be complicated in the beginning, but just play around with them and look at the mission that you want to do and then decide which mode will be best for that. The final fusion reactor I want to talk about is the 3-alpha colliding beam fusion reactor. This one has an integrated direct conversion generator, which means that it will always operate at the maximum efficiency. And it can use just anetronic fusion modes, proton-lithium, helium-3, and proton-boron fusion. And it's quite efficient at that, so you will not need a lot of radiators for that. So this makes this reactor quite good for electric propulsion crafts, simply because you save the weight of a lot of radiators. Up to this point, I'd say this is mid to mid-end game, and these two reactors are, I'd say, really late game reactors. First is the antimatter initiated fusion reactor. If you can see that at 2.5 meter size, this one produces so much more power than the tokamak reactor. And I need to close that up. So here, the antimatter initiated fusion reactor produces 18 gigawatts of power at 20,000 Kelvin core temperature, and the tokamak has just 3,200 Kelvin at this mode, 1.2 gigawatts of power. So this one is way more efficient, and you can see that here, that it produces over 1,000 kilonewtons of thrust. Compare that to the pebble bed, 300 kilonewtons at almost 3 times the specific impulse. So this one is clearly very, very powerful, and advantage here is that it also doesn't use a lot of fuel. It's just simple fusion of, what is it here? Microfusion. It uses liquid deuterium and liquid helium-3. The helium-3 is expensive, but as I said, it can be harvested and produce a lot of power, so this can also be a nice launch vehicle. And this only gets towered by the antimatter reactor, which creates even more power, up to 45 gigawatts, which is ridiculously high. But this antimatter reactor will just directly use antimatter and produce huge amounts of power, but antimatter is very expensive. But you can do fun things like attach it to a plasma nozzle and get quite the thrust at ridiculously high ISPs. And if I just cheat that thing up to orbit, not Eve, but Kerbal. So if I put that thing into orbit, I will get a 10,000 ISP out of this plasma nozzle, which is just, it's ridiculously high. And if you get to this point in the game, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. But if I'm in space right now, I can just quickly also show the magnetic nozzle while being used. Show that it actually generates some thrust. Shut this down, shut this down. Shut this down as well. And you can see this generates small amount of thrust, but at a huge ISP, and you can also warp while doing that. Right now it's of course ridiculous, but if you build a craft specifically for that, you can reach very high speeds. Oh, and I forgot to talk about one reactor. I always forget that one. It's quite a nice one, actually. It's a really late game reactor. It's the Quantum Singularity Reactor. This baby basically harnessed the power of a small singularity, small black hole, to create ridiculous amounts of power, even higher than the antimatter. And to start it up, you need 59 gigawatts of power. So I have this colliding beam reactor producing 2 gigawatts, though if I start it up, this will basically consume all the power and then start it up. and you can see that this thing creates, even at the smallest power output of 10%, creates 320 freaking gigawatts of power. And that results in 26 gigawatts of charged power at the smallest level. And I can scale this singularity up to produce up to 260 gigawatts of power. So this thing can create, with this thing you can create really, really powerful microwave networks, for example, or electric propulsion, or whatever you like. This thing is late game, really, really late game science fiction. It's a beast. But also note that, yeah, if you use this, you will need a lot of radiators. So if I pump this up to 100%, this will just overheat these reactors in no time. All right, so in terms of explaining, I think that should be it. And following now, I will just show some example crafts with different reactors and how I like to use them. Alright, so this is my pebble bed transport system. It features a 2.5 meter pebble bed reactor connected to a thermal launch nozzle. The propellants are methyl logs and methane in the second part of the flight. And it weighs at launch around 110 tons and has a 36-ton orange tank as the payload. So the payload to mass ratio is about 30%, which is pretty good. As you can see, like every pebble reactor, core temperature rises during the launch, which means power output decreases, but ISP increases. It reaches an 80 by 80 kilometer orbit quite easily, and as a little bonus, you can also attempt to land this thing. It has way more than enough delta V to do that. Attempting is the key word here because it can be quite difficult, because this thing sometimes struggles with heat, so you have to very carefully use your air brakes and in the end time your deceleration burn correctly and watch your height over the ground. As you can see, I would have easily made the deceleration work, but unfortunately in the end I crashed. But yay, the pebble reactor and the nozzle survived, so the most important and expensive parts survived. The second one here, this is a microwave power station. It uses two spherical magnetic confinement stellarator reactors in deuterium-lithium 6 mode. It creates quite a decent amount of charged power, decent gigawatts per reactor. I have two of those, and with the extra supply of lithium and deuterium, it gives me over 5 years runtime at 100% power usage. The reactors are connected to a generator, and those are connected to a gyrotron and a ultraviolet beam transmitter. This works pretty well. This thing is an example for a high-speed magnetic propulsion probe. It uses a magnetic confinement tokamak reactor connected to a magnetic nozzle. You can accelerate during time warp to spiral your way out of the sphere of influence of Kerbin, and it gets its high speed name because I will just point at any body, for example Eve, and I will continuously accelerate towards this body until my velocity vector matches the direction I want to go. So right now I'm flying towards Eve at 36 kilometers per second. So this will be a very quick flyby. In around 2 weeks I will reach Eve, fly by Eve at a very high speed. But if I would plan it more carefully, I could also easily make orbit around Eve, and in the end I have way more than enough delta V to crash this thing into the sun. And the last thing I want to show right now is this electrical lander that I built. It uses a colliding beam reactor because this thing combines a reactor and a generator, so it's quite light. And with the Attila thruster, it has quite a decent thrust. In hydrogen mode, or with hydrogen fuel, it has a ton of delta V, and I can easily land this thing on the Mun. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, I just threw this together very quickly, but just to give you an idea, the colliding beam reactor is good for landing. So that's it. That should be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you have any questions, let me know. I'm still debating about what the next episode is going to be. I think electrical propulsion, so I'm going to talk more in detail about the Attila and the plasma thruster. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and bye.